It's a little bit like an expectant mother who lives through those long months of pregnancy, anticipating the day of her baby's birth. But finally, and suddenly, all at once, and without any kind of announcement, she gets a signal that lets her know her hour has come. And she knows what comes after this, the struggle of labor and the joy of delivery. It's like that for Jesus. When His hour finally comes, He knows that it will mean the struggle of crucifixion and death, but He also knows that it will be followed by the joy of resurrection. In this gospel, at least, Jesus says, I lay down my life, I will take it up again. I will go through death, but there will be resurrection. That's why He sometimes calls this the hour of His glorification. So maybe it shouldn't surprise us when He says that the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. And then immediately after that, says that unless a grain of wheat falls to the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Jesus is not talking about a seed. He is talking about Himself. He is talking about His own death and about what it will accomplish. He is comparing Himself to a seed, and that's why I needed Lynn Morrow to come explain to me what happens when a seed falls to the earth and dies. So he did. He came in with a few pages of information he had printed off the internet and a tray full of visual aids, including a few potted seedlings that had recently sprouted, some roasted peanuts still in the shell, and a Ziploc bag full of assorted seeds, including wheat and corn and barley. The first thing he did was to crack open one of those peanut shells and then take off the papery skin around one of the nuts, crack the nut open, and show me a little bump down near the bottom of one half of the nut. A tiny little thing, about the size of a pencil point. What is that? I asked. That's the embryo, he said. I didn't know that peanuts had embryos. But that's what you get for asking a PhD in botany. Lynn assured me that every seed has an embryo inside, and that even though seeds could be dormant for dozens, even hundreds of years, if they got enough soil and sunlight and warmth and moisture, that little embryo would wake up, come to life, and begin putting down roots and lifting up leaves. If it was a dicot, he said, like that peanut or like one of those white beans he had sprouted, the cotyledons would spread like angel wings on either side of the stem. But if it was a monocot, like the seed corn I remembered from the old-fashioned hardware store, then the roots would go down and a shoot would go up, but both shoot and roots would be nourished by the seed. And while Lynn assured me that the seed never really dies, it just goes dormant, he did acknowledge that the thing we know as a seed gives itself up as nourishment for the embryo inside it. And then he did this wonderful thing. He stood up and said the roots go down like this, and the shoot goes up like this, and then the leaves spread out so that you end up with something that is almost in the shape of a man. And suddenly I couldn't miss the theological implications. If Jesus was the seed, then that embryo nourished by His flesh must be the church. Let me say it again. If Jesus was the seed, then that embryo nourished by His flesh must be the church. Unless a seed falls to the earth and dies, it remains alone, he said. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. I began to think about those rows of corn I had hoed as a boy, those tall green stalks, each one of them with several fat ears, and each ear nearly bursting out of its shuck with fruitfulness. When we would gather those ears into baskets and bring them to the back porch and start stripping off the husk, we would find that each ear was loaded down with hundreds, literally hundreds of kernels of corn. All of that from a single seed. If you think about it as Jesus and the church, you can imagine how all of us here have been produced by that single seed that once fell to earth in order to bear much fruit. So I was thinking about that on Wednesday while Lynn was still sitting there in my study. He said, "You know, one of the things that fascinates me about seeds is that if you plant a corn seed, you get a corn plant. And if you plant an acorn, you get an oak tree. In other words, all that genetic information is stored up inside that little seed. And as the plant grows, it becomes what the seed tells it to." If that's true about Jesus, then here is His church, sharing in His substance, replicating His DNA, becoming all the original seed tells it to. Or at least, that's what we would hope. The book of Acts tells us that it was in Antioch of Syria that the believers were first called Christians. The word means little Christ, and it was meant as a derogatory term in those days by the unbelievers who would point and say, "Well, look at these Christians, these little Christs walking around." It was meant as an insult, but it could be taken as the best kind of compliment, couldn't it? If someone said, "You are such a Christian, such a little Christ," the genetic information that was in that seed has been passed along to you. The life that was in that seed has nourished your life. You have grown up to be the spitting image of what He was and is. On the windowsill in my study this morning, I still have those seedlings Lynn brought to me on Wednesday. You can see the plant growing right up through what is left of the seed. You can see how that seed nourished the plant and gave it life. And you can see that there's not much of it left anymore. Everything it was, it gave for the sake of that little plant. Just like Jesus. Unless a seed falls to the earth and dies, it remains alone, He said. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Hear this word, O church. You are the fruit that Jesus died to produce. Look around you. Look at what His life and death have done. And then live like you've been died for on this day and forevermore. Amen.